The greatest secrets of ancient empires are not found in their ruins, but in the empty spaces between them. Beneath the familiar stories of kings and conquests ran a hidden system of shadow networks, the invisible roads that moved ideas, goods, and people across continents. These pathways were the true lifeblood of civilizations, yet they left almost no physical trace for us to find. How could something so vital to human history simply vanish from view? And what forces allowed a society like the Indus Valley to trade with Mesopotamia without a single paved road connecting them? By the end of this journey, you will see the entire map of the ancient world redrawn, revealing a web of connection you never knew existed. What forgotten pathway lies hidden in the landscape around you? A spider's web glistens with perfect geometry, yet the spider's own journey across its threads remains unseen. This is the essence of a shadow network. These were the ancient world's true circulatory system, a parallel universe of movement that existed alongside the grand, stone-paved roads of empires. They were not just footpaths through a forest, they were complex, living routes for transporting delicate goods like spices and silks, for secret messengers carrying vital information between rulers, and for the silent, steady migration of ideas and technologies. Think of the Roman Via Appia, its stones still visible today, and then think of a route that left no stones at all. A river used for 1,000 years as a highway, its only evidence a scatter of foreign pottery shards along its banks. A desert path defined by the stars, remembered only in the oral traditions of nomadic peoples. A mountain pass used seasonally for moving livestock, leaving nothing but a faint imprint on the land. These are the shadow networks. To find them, archaeologists cannot look for ruins. Instead, they trace the ghostly fingerprints of connection. They map the sudden appearance of identical pottery styles in distant valleys. They decode the shared words for copper or sail across unrelated languages. They even follow the trail of genetic markers in ancient populations, telling a story of movement that written history forgot. By defining these invisible roads, we begin to see the ancient world not as a collection of isolated cities, but as a single, breathing entity connected by countless unseen threads. So where do we find the very first evidence of these hidden pathways? The answer lies deep in our prehistory, long before the first city was ever built. Our story begins not with empires, but with footsteps. The very first shadow networks were etched into the earth by small bands of hunter-gatherers, moving out of Africa in pursuit of migrating herds and ripening wild grains. For these early peoples, the path was not a choice but a necessity, a thread of survival woven directly into the landscape by the seasons themselves. There were no maps, no planned destinations, only the memory of where water could be found or where certain stones for tools lay. This was movement in its purest form, an organic web of trails created by countless individual journeys over thousands of years. The evidence for these primordial highways is subtle yet profound. In the Neolithic Near East, a hunter might carry a core of volcanic glass, obsidian, from a quarry in Anatolia. That same obsidian, fashioned into a razor-sharp blade, would later be found hundreds of miles away, its chemical signature betraying an epic, unrecorded journey. In prehistoric Europe, pieces of golden amber from the distant Baltic coast traveled south, passed from hand to hand along routes that modern maps still cannot accurately trace. These were not trade routes as we think of them today, with merchants and markets. This was a slow, relentless tide of connection, where a precious object or a new way to shape a stone tool could diffuse across a continent over generations. We see the ghost of these pathways in the distribution of similar tool styles found in caves from France to Siberia, and in the shared artistic symbols painted on secluded rock faces. This evidence paints a startling picture of the ancient world. It reveals a level of interconnectedness that completely shatters the old idea of isolated, ignorant prehistoric communities. A person living in what is now Turkey might never see the sea, yet they could hold a seashell that had traveled from the Red Sea, or a bead made from a gemstone found only in the mountains of Afghanistan. These nascent networks, born from the basic needs of survival, laid the entire foundation for everything that was to come. They proved that humanity was always linked, long before the first city wall was ever raised. The vibrant markets of ancient Ur were a symphony of distant origins. A merchant could hold a deep blue lapis lazuli bead, knowing it was mined from the mountains of Afghanistan, or inspect a log of fragrant cedar that had journeyed from the forests of Lebanon. These objects, along with copper from Oman and shells from the Indus Valley, arrived in the heart of Mesopotamia without a single permanent road guiding them home. The true infrastructure of this empire was not stone but water. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers functioned as liquid highways, dynamic and ever-changing. Cuneiform tablets, the ancient filing systems of their day, are filled with records of merchants who relied on these waterways. They used nimble reed boats, buoyant and easily constructed, to transport enormous quantities of grain, wool, and pottery. This fluvial network was far more efficient for moving heavy or bulky goods than any overland trail could ever be. A caravan of donkeys might take weeks to cross harsh terrain, while a boat could carry 10 times the load in a fraction of the time, riding the current downstream. The real expertise, the secret knowledge that powered this entire system, was not written on any map. It was held in the minds of sailors. They knew the river's moods, which channels were deep enough in the dry season, and how to read the seasonal winds of the Persian Gulf to sail back upstream. This was a living, breathing network of information passed from one generation to the next. From the river banks of Sumer, these shadow networks extended like invisible threads. They reached down the length of the Persian Gulf, connecting the great city-states with distant civilizations like Dilmun and Magan, and ultimately to the sophisticated cities of the Indus Valley, thousands of miles away. This exchange moved far beyond physical objects. The same boats that carried copper and gemstones also carried revolutionary ideas, new techniques for irrigating fields, concepts of law and administration, and even the fundamentals of writing itself traveled along these watery routes. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia may have reached for the skies, but the civilization's true foundation was this hidden, flowing web of connection. It was a system so fluid and adaptable that it left almost no physical trace for archaeologists to dig up, yet its influence shaped the entire ancient world. This mastery of a river's hidden potential was not unique to Mesopotamia. Far to the west, another civilization was performing a similar miracle on a different, even more predictable river. While the Nile was Egypt's great, pulsing artery, its true strength lay in the silent, sun-scorched corridors that stretched into the desert. A caravan of donkeys moves through the moonlit eastern desert, their hooves whispering on the gravel. They carry gold from the mines of Nubia, bound for the pharaoh's treasury, but they follow no road we would recognize. They traverse a shadow network, a pathway defined not by stone but by memory. For millennia, nomadic tribes like the Medjay served as the masters of these invisible highways. Their knowledge was the map. They knew the location of every hidden seep, every seasonal pool of water tucked within a canyon wall. They could navigate by the unwavering positions of certain stars, crossing vast, featureless plains of sand and rock with a confidence that would seem like magic to an outsider. These desert routes were not mere shortcuts. They were critical lifelines to resources the Nile Valley itself could not provide. Through the Wadi Hammamat, a direct overland path from the Nile to the Red Sea, Egyptians avoided the river's great, sweeping bend to the north. This brought them turquoise from the mines of Sinai and from the distant and legendary land of Punt, exotic goods like incense, ebony, and live animals for the royal menagerie. The evidence of these journeys is not found in grand monuments, but in the subtle inscriptions and drawings left on desert rock faces, a library of stone mapping routes used for generations. This mastery of the desert gave the Egyptian state a power that reached far beyond the lush banks of the Nile. It created a buffer zone of influence and intelligence. Scouts and messengers could move quickly and unseen, allowing the pharaoh to project his will and gather information from distant frontiers. The stability of the kingdom, its ability to build pyramids and field great armies, depended on these unseen channels for trade, for moving troops, and for maintaining contact with neighboring powers. The desert, so often portrayed as an empty, impenetrable barrier, was in fact an intricate web of opportunity for those who knew how to read its secrets. This same principle of hidden connection was being perfected to an astonishing degree in another river valley, far to the east. The cities of the Indus Valley civilization operated as a network so seamless, it challenges our very idea of what an ancient empire should look like. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro reveal a society obsessed with order, with perfectly standardized bricks and intricate water channels running beneath their streets. But this visible perfection hides their deepest secret. The Indus Valley civilization mastered a form of connection so subtle it has almost completely vanished from the archaeological record. We find their distinctive carved seals in the ruins of Mesopotamian cities like Ur, thousands of miles to the west. In return, copper from Oman and carnelian from Gujarat appear in Indus settlements. This was not an empire connected by royal roads or marked by triumphant inscriptions. Its lifeblood was a shadow network of staggering complexity, a web of trade that moved goods and ideas without leaving a single, central path for us to follow. How did they achieve this? The rivers were their first highways. The massive, unpredictable Indus and its tributaries provided a natural transport grid, with boats moving goods between cities with an efficiency that rivaled any paved road. Their routes were seasonal, shifting with the monsoon cycles, a fluid system that left no permanent mark. Archaeologists find no grand ports, only subtle clues like clusters of foreign pottery on riverbanks. To reconstruct these ghostly routes, scientists now use techniques like isotopic analysis. By studying the chemical fingerprints trapped within a piece of pottery or a copper ingot, they can pinpoint the exact clay pit or mine it came from, mapping a journey that written history never recorded. This invisible infrastructure was a conduit for revolution. It was through these channels that the knowledge of cotton cultivation, a technology unique to the Indus, spread to the rest of the world. The concept of wheel-made pottery traveled along these same paths. This civilization's greatest strength, its distributed and adaptable network, may have also been its undoing. When climatic changes began to alter the river systems and disrupt the monsoon patterns, the very pathways that sustained them began to fade. The cities did not fall to an invasion we can find evidence for. They simply dwindled as the connections that bound them together dissolved back into the landscape. The Indus civilization demonstrates that the most resilient network is often the one you cannot see, a lesson echoed in another part of the world where a people learned to weave their empire across the roof of the continent. A runner's heart pounds in the thin air of the Andes, his feet tracing a path worn deep by generations before the Inca ever ruled. He is a chasqui, a human relay station in the world's most efficient communication network, carrying a coded message in the form of knotted strings, a quipu, from the imperial capital toward a distant outpost. While the grandeur of the Inca stone-paved royal road, the Quhapac Ñan, rightly captures our imagination, the empire's true genius lay in the web of unpaved shadow trails that threaded through the most impossible landscapes. These narrow footpaths, often just wide enough for a single person, were the capillaries feeding the great arterial roads. They connected remote mountain terraces growing precious potatoes to sacred springs hidden in high valleys and to mines burrowed into steep cliffsides. This intricate web was maintained through a communal labor tax, the mitas system, which bound every family to the upkeep of the pathways that sustained them. The true purpose of this network was to master the mountains themselves. The Inca strategy, known as vertical archipelagos, involved controlling not a continuous territory, but a collection of specialized ecological islands. A single polity might have lands in the frigid highlands for producing freeze-dried potatoes, parcels in the temperate valleys for maize, and others in the steamy lowlands for cultivating coca and fruits. The shadow trails were the essential threads that stitched these disparate zones into a single, resilient economic unit. A drought in the highlands could be offset by a harvest from the valley, all coordinated through the movement of people and goods along these unseen routes. Today, modern researchers are using satellite imagery and geographic information systems to finally map the staggering scale of this system. The lines they trace reveal not one empire, but two, a visible network of power for the state, and a deeper, older, and far more intricate network of local survival that the Inca wisely absorbed and amplified. This layered structure, from the imperial highway to the communal footpath, shows how the most enduring shadow networks operate at every scale of human society, from a mountain village to a continental empire. This same mastery of an invisible landscape was being perfected not in the mountains, but across the trackless expanse of the world's largest ocean. The Polynesian voyagers looked not to the earth for their paths, but to the sky, reading a map written in the stars, the waves, and the flight of birds. A double-hulled voyaging canoe glides across the empty expanse of the Pacific, its crew navigating a world without landmarks by reading a map written in the heavens themselves. For the Polynesian explorers, the ocean was not a barrier but a network of liquid pathways, a shadow system of staggering sophistication built entirely on knowledge. They were masters of wayfinding, a complex science of memory and observation. Navigators memorized the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of stars, creating a mental star compass that turned the night sky into a reliable chart. They learned to feel the subtle direction of ocean swells through the hull of their canoe, and to watch for the specific flight patterns of birds that always returned to land at dusk. This was a network of currents and constellations, not of stone or soil. They recognized the great oceanic rivers like the equatorial countercurrent as a distinct highway, a consistent flow that could carry them toward new horizons. This invisible infrastructure enabled one of humanity's most audacious expansions, settling islands scattered across millions of square miles of ocean, from Hawaii to Aotearoa, New Zealand, to the isolated shores of Rapa Nui. Along these star paths traveled more than just people. Volcanic glass from one island chain would appear as tools in another. Specialized basalt for making adzes was traded across vast distances. Most importantly, they carried the roots and shoots of domesticated plants, transplanting entire ecosystems by moving taro, coconut, and the sweet potato across the sea. This network left no ruins, no paved roads, not a single permanent marker. Its entirety existed in the oral traditions, the chants, and the meticulously trained memory of master navigators, passed from one generation to the next. In modern times, experimental voyages like those of the Hokula have proven the stunning accuracy of these methods, sailing from Hawaii to Tahiti using only the stars and the waves as a guide. The result was a cultural sphere united by language and custom across a full third of the globe, a civilization connected by a web that remains completely invisible to satellite imagery. This stands as the ultimate proof that the most powerful networks are those woven from knowledge alone, leaving the physical world untouched. From this mastery of the open ocean, our search for these hidden pathways returns to the heart of the ancient old world, to the legendary Silk Road and the bustling shadow networks that operated just beyond its famous caravan tracks. The real currency of the Silk Road was not silk but secrets. Under the vast, starry canopy of the Pamir Mountains, a Sogdian merchant concludes a silent bargain, trading not in bolts of cloth but in whispered intelligence, a new religious text, or a small pouch of rare medicinal herbs. While history celebrates the grand caravan routes connecting Rome and Chang'an, these famous paths were merely the public face of a far more intricate system. A deeper shadow network of alternate trails carried the most sensitive and valuable cargo, the goods and ideas that powers did not want advertised. This hidden web threaded through the most unforgiving landscapes. It snaked through the Taklamakan Desert, a sea of sand where survival depended on secret oases known only to local guides. It climbed into high, remote passes like the Wakhan Corridor, a slender valley threading between empires, allowing travelers to bypass official toll stations and the ever-present threat of bandits. It was along these unseen arteries that the most profound transformations traveled. Buddhism moved from India into the heart of China, not along the main roads, but through these quieter, monastic corridors. Nestorian Christianity spread eastward into Central Asia, and revolutionary technologies like the art of papermaking began their slow, clandestine journey westward. But these channels carried invisible threats as well. The same network that transmitted enlightenment also delivered devastation, serving as the conduit for the Black Death, a plague that reshaped continents. The evidence for these ghost roads is as elusive as the routes themselves. It surfaces in libraries of lost documents, like those written in the mysterious Tocharian languages, discovered sealed in caves along these forgotten paths. It is found in hoards of coins buried far from any major settlement, suggesting payments made for services rendered in the shadows. The genius of this secondary system was its fluidity. When a kingdom fell or a main route became too dangerous, these shadow trails simply shifted, adapting to new political realities or changing climate patterns. They ensured that the vital pulse of exchange never truly stopped, even as empires rose and crumbled around them. This reveals that the legendary Silk Road we study on maps was only the visible peak of a much deeper, more resilient network. The true architects of this enduring connectivity were not the settled empires, but the nomadic powers who moved through the spaces in between. A Mongol courier could outrun any army, his speed a product of the ultimate shadow network. Across the vastness of the Eurasian steppe, the Yam system operated like a continental nervous system, a relay of horse stations spaced a day's ride apart. Here, a messenger bearing a golden paisa, a passport of the Great Khan, could exchange his tired mount for a fresh one and race on, covering distances that would have been unthinkable in settled Europe or China. This was the pinnacle of nomadic infrastructure, a network built not on roads but on movement itself. For centuries, the Scythians, the Xiongnu, and the Turks had perfected this way of life, turning the entire grassland sea into a dynamic highway. Their routes were not fixed lines on a map, but broad corridors that shifted with the seasons, following the rains and the growth of pasture for their immense herds. This mobility was their supreme strategic advantage. They controlled the arteries of trade between the great settled civilizations, acting as the indispensable middlemen for every luxury that passed between East and West. A Scythian chieftain buried in a kurgan, a great burial mound on the Ukrainian plain, might be interred with exquisite Chinese silks, intricate Greek goldwork, and Persian carpets, a testament to the astonishing range of goods that flowed along these invisible trails. How was such a vast system maintained without a single paved road or a permanent administrative building? The answer lies in a culture built on reciprocity and alliance. Complex kinship ties and a deeply ingrained tradition of hospitality bound these societies together. A traveler from an allied clan would be granted food, shelter, and fresh animals as a matter of honor, a social code that effectively replaced the need for roadside inns and state-sponsored way stations. When the Mongols unified the steppe, they did not invent this system. They simply scaled it to an imperial level, formalizing the yam and enforcing a peace, the Pax Mongolica, that allowed merchants like Marco Polo to travel in relative safety. This stability had a hidden consequence, one that echoes through military history. It was along these grassy corridors that revolutionary technologies like the stirrup and the powerful composite bow traveled from east to west, technologies that would fundamentally reshape the nature of warfare in Europe and the Middle East. The steppe empires proved that the most powerful networks are not always the most visible, and that control over movement can be a greater source of power than any walled city. This mastery of an unseen landscape was not unique to the open plains, as a very different kind of shadow network was thriving under the dense canopy of the Americas. A Maya trader guides his dug-out canoe along a twisting river, its surface dappled by the dense jungle canopy overhead. His cargo of polished jade and iridescent quetzal feathers is more valuable than gold, and his route is a carefully guarded secret. Throughout Mesoamerica, the lifeblood of great cities like Tikal and Palenque flowed not along grand avenues, but through this hidden lattice of riverine highways and narrow jungle trails. These were shadow networks engineered for discretion. Paths were kept narrow and unobtrusive, deliberately avoiding the strait, imposing causeways that would come later with the Aztecs. This was a strategic choice, a way to control the movement of supremely valuable commodities and to evade the eyes of rival city-states. The most precious of these goods was cacao, the beans that served as hard currency across the region. Controlling its path from the fertile lowland groves to the highland courts was a source of immense power, but these channels carried far more than just wealth. The same hidden routes that transported jade and cacao also transmitted the very ideas that defined Mesoamerican culture. The sacred ball game, with its profound cosmic symbolism, spread from community to community. The intricate and remarkably accurate Maya calendar system traveled along these paths, adopted and adapted by different peoples across hundreds of miles. How do we trace roads that the jungle has long since reclaimed? The evidence lies in the subtle patterns left behind. Archaeologists map the distribution of distinct pottery styles, finding the same decorative motifs in cities separated by vast, trackless forests. Even more revealing is the science of isotopic analysis applied to ancient bones. By studying the chemical signatures in the teeth of skeletons, scientists can determine if an individual grew up drinking water from a different region, revealing patterns of migration and intermarriage that wove these distant cities together through family ties. This interconnected web was the civilization's great strength, but it also proved to be its fatal weakness. The collapse of the classic Maya civilization was not a single event, but a slow unraveling. As warfare between city-states intensified and a prolonged drought gripped the region, these vital shadow networks began to disintegrate. A city cut off from its sources of water, food, or allied warriors was a city doomed to silence. The very jungle that had once served as a protective medium for connection became a prison, isolating urban centers and accelerating their decline. This story reveals a profound truth about shadow networks. A civilization woven together by invisible threads can achieve incredible cultural unity, yet it remains terrifyingly vulnerable to the severing of a single, crucial line. From the hidden rivers of the Maya, our journey moves to a different kind of liquid highway, one that connected the bustling ports and secluded coves of the ancient Mediterranean. A Phoenician ship sails by night, its captain steering by the steady glow of the North Star on a journey from Tyre to a destination beyond the known world, past the Pillars of Hercules. His cargo is the secret of an empire, tinned from the misty islands of Britain, and his route is a state secret guarded with ruthless efficiency. The sunny, well-traveled Mediterranean we often picture was, in fact, crisscrossed by these clandestine sea lanes, a shadow network operating in plain sight. While imperial galleys moved between major ports, these hidden routes connected secluded coves and small, uninhabited islands, all to evade the watchful eyes of tax collectors and the grasping control of mainland powers. The evidence for these ghostly voyages is not found in sunken ships, but in the humble clay amphorae that litter the seafloor. These ceramic containers, each with a distinct shape and stamp, were the shipping containers of the ancient world, carrying wine, olive oil, and the pungent fish sauce known as garum. By mapping where specific types of these jars appear, archaeologists can trace the hidden currents of trade. We find Phoenician settlements not on the mainland of Sardinia or Spain, but on tiny offshore islands, perfectly positioned for discretion and quick departure. These secret channels were conduits for revolution. The alphabet, a transformative technology that democratized writing, did not spread slowly over land through official channels. It raced across the Mediterranean along these very sea lanes, carried by Phoenician merchants who used it for simple record-keeping, a tool that would eventually be adopted and adapted by the Greeks. The knowledge of advanced ironworking traveled in a similar way, bypassing the empires that sought to control such powerful secrets. Even as Rome claimed mastery over the inland sea, these shadow networks persisted. They were used by early Christians to move missionaries and texts safely away from persecution, and by traders dealing in goods that circumvented imperial monopolies. The cult of Mithras, a mysterious soldier's religion, spread with astonishing speed from port to port, not along the great Roman roads, but through these maritime undercurrents. This reveals a profound truth, that the sea which connected empires was also the perfect medium for evading them, a space where knowledge and faith could flow freely, just beneath the surface of official history. From the physical movement of ships and goods, we now turn to the most elusive shadow network of all, the invisible web that transmitted ideas themselves. A single manuscript, copied by hand and carried across 1,000 miles, could rewrite the destiny of a civilization. While spices and silks traveled the main caravan routes, the most transformative cargo of all, knowledge, flowed along its own dedicated shadow networks. These were the invisible roads of the mind, traversed by a special class of travelers. A Buddhist monk, his robes thin against the Himalayan cold, would memorize not only sacred sutras but entire treatises on mathematics and astronomy from India's great Nalanda University, carrying this intellectual wealth to a monastery in China. His path was a secret known only to a small brotherhood of pilgrims, a high-altitude trail that bypassed the bustling trade towns below. This movement of ideas created a kind of ancient internet, a republic of letters and learning that connected thinkers across continents long before the modern world was born. These intellectual highways relied on secure way stations, places where knowledge could be translated, copied, and debated. The legendary House of Wisdom in Baghdad stands as a perfect example. It was not an isolated library, but a vibrant node in a global network. There, scholars gathered texts from the far corners of the known world, translating the works of Greek philosophers like Aristotle, the medical wisdom of Galen, the complex mathematics of Indian sages, and the astronomical tables of Persian scholars, all into Arabic. This was not merely preservation, it was a creative fusion, generating new breakthroughs in algebra, optics, and chemistry that would later fuel the European Renaissance. The network's pathways were diverse. Buddhist sutras, originally composed in Sanskrit, traveled from the artistic crossroads of Gandhara along shadow trails into Central Asia and China, where they were translated into Tibetan and Chinese, forever altering the spiritual landscape of East Asia. Centuries later, that same synthesized knowledge from the Islamic world, now enriched with its own discoveries, would flow back into Europe through other shadowy conduits, the translation schools of Spain and the royal courts of Sicily. The evidence for this profound exchange is written in the shared intellectual DNA of our world. Look at the number 0. This concept, essential for higher mathematics, appears to have emerged in India, traveled into the Islamic world, and was then transmitted to Europe, where it revolutionized commerce and science. The startling similarities between complex mathematical texts from vastly different cultures are not a coincidence. They are the direct result of this clandestine traffic in ideas. These networks of knowledge proved incredibly resilient. During times of war, political collapse, or social upheaval, when empires crumbled and trade routes faltered, the monasteries, madrasas, and royal libraries often remained as isolated fortresses of learning. Scribes continued their work by candlelight, ensuring that the flame of human understanding was never extinguished, patiently waiting for a more stable time when a traveling scholar could once again carry those ideas forward. This silent, relentless movement of thought along invisible roads has shaped every aspect of our modern world, from the science we teach to the very numbers we use to count. But ideas were not the only invisible cargo moving through these hidden channels. A different kind of biological exchange was also underway, one that would reshape entire landscapes and dinner tables across the globe. A single potato pulled from the soil of the Andes could set in motion a chain of events that would rewrite the destiny of nations. This humble tuber, along with maize, tomatoes, and cacao, traveled across the Atlantic not in the treasure holds of galleons, but as provisions for hungry sailors, as cuttings traded between curious farmers, and even hidden in the ballast soil of ships. The Columbian Exchange, that monumental transfer of life between the old world and the new, was arguably the greatest shadow network in human history. It operated almost entirely through these unofficial, personal channels, completely bypassing royal decrees and formal trade agreements. Spanish and Portuguese vessels became unwitting arks, carrying a hidden biological cargo that would irrevocably alter the planet. Alongside the conquistadors came European seeds for wheat and barley, slips of grapevines, and the shoots of sugar cane. Stowed away in the same ships were invisible passengers, the microbes for diseases like smallpox and measles, to which the indigenous populations of the Americas had no immunity. The consequences were catastrophic, a demographic collapse on a scale that is still difficult to fully comprehend. Yet this tragic exchange flowed in both directions. The arrival of the potato in Europe offered a calorie-rich bulwark against famine, eventually fueling a population boom. The tomato, after centuries of being grown as a decorative curiosity in monastic gardens, would journey from Mesoamerica to become the very soul of Italian cuisine. None of this was planned by empires. It was the quiet, relentless work of informal networks, enslaved Africans carrying the agricultural knowledge of their homelands in their memories, introduced vital crops like okra, black-eyed peas, and rice into the Americas, crops that would become foundational to cultures across the southern United States and the Caribbean. These biological stowaways created entirely new agricultural landscapes and transformed global diets in ways that no official policy ever could. The most profound changes often move along the paths we least expect, leaving almost no paperwork behind, yet they reshape the world beneath our feet. These hidden pathways of life were not drawn at random, however. They were profoundly shaped by the invisible hand of the planet itself, by the climate and environment that either welcomed travelers or forced them to find another way. The Sahara Desert was not always a sea of sand. For thousands of years, it was a green savanna, its grasslands dotted with lakes and threaded with rivers that served as natural highways for early herds and the people who followed them. This lush world reveals a fundamental truth about shadow networks. They were shaped not just by human will, but by the planet itself. Environmental corridors acted as climate gates, swinging open during periods of favorable weather to allow movement, and slamming shut during times of drought, isolating entire regions for centuries. The story of human expansion across Africa is written in these shifting gates. During a wet phase several thousand years ago, the Sahel Corridor, a band of fertile land south of the Sahara, became a wide open door. It was through this gate that Bantu-speaking peoples, armed with new ironworking technology and advanced agricultural knowledge, began their epic migration. They did not conquer their way south. They simply walked through a landscape made hospitable by increased rainfall, their movement tracing a path of linguistic and cultural connection that still defines the continent today. Far to the north, the Sahara itself transformed from a barrier into a bridge. As the climate grew drier, the great green savanna retreated, but the knowledge of where water could be found remained. This gave rise to the legendary sand roads, the trans-Saharan trade routes that connected the gold-rich empires of Ghana and Mali to the Mediterranean world. These were not fixed lines, but fluid pathways that shifted with the location of oases, their very existence dictated by the delicate balance of desert hydrology. A caravan's survival depended on a deep, generational understanding of where the next well would be, a map written in the stars and in the subtle signs of the landscape. This principle of environmental routing was universal. In North America, the Mississippi River and its countless tributaries formed a liquid latticework, a hidden highway system that moved people and goods across the continent. Copper from the distant Great Lakes, fashioned into ceremonial artifacts, traveled south to the great mound-building city of Cahokia. In return, shells from the Gulf Coast and obsidian from the Rocky Mountains moved north, all carried on dugout canoes along these watery corridors, long before any European ever set foot on the continent. These environmental pathways provided a stability that political borders never could. Kingdoms rose and fell, but the river continued to flow, the mountain pass remained, and the memory of the oasis persisted. How can we possibly know when these climate gates were open or closed? The answers are locked in the earth itself. Paleoclimatology, the science of ancient weather, deciphers this lost history. By analyzing tiny air bubbles trapped in ice cores drilled from glaciers, or by studying the layers of sediment at the bottom of ancient lakes, scientists can reconstruct rainfall patterns and temperature shifts over thousands of years. They can pinpoint the exact centuries when the Sahara was green, or when a drought in the American Southwest might have forced the ancestral Pueblones to abandon their cliff dwellings and migrate along new, unseen trails. This reveals that shadow networks are a continuous dialogue between human ambition and the natural world, a dance where the environment sets the rhythm and humanity finds the steps. To truly map these conversations, we need to move from the global scale of climate down to the intimate scale of the objects these networks left behind. The true map of the ancient world is written not on parchment, but in the atoms of a single human tooth. An archaeologist in a lab studies a skeleton found near Stonehenge, its origins a mystery for millennia. By analyzing the subtle ratios of strontium and oxygen isotopes locked within the tooth enamel, formed during childhood, a stunning fact emerges. This individual drank water and ate food from a region hundreds of miles away, growing up in the distant Alps before their final journey to the British plains. This is not magic, it is modern science, a form of archaeological detective work that allows us to trace the ghostly footprints of shadow networks with a precision our predecessors could never have dreamed of. Isotopic analysis acts as a geographic passport for the long dead, revealing patterns of individual migration that rewrite our understanding of entire cultures. We can now trace the lifetime journey of an Inuit hunter from the Canadian Arctic to Greenland, or follow a Roman soldier from his birthplace in North Africa to his final post on the damp frontier of Britain. The very chemistry of our bodies holds a permanent record of the landscapes we have called home. This same scientific lens can be turned to the objects these people carried. A seemingly mundane pottery shard, unearthed from a trash pit in a Maya city, can be washed and analyzed for microscopic residues. The chemical signature that remains might be theobromine, a clear indicator that this vessel once held a frothy, bitter drink made from cacao, a luxury good often transported along secret jungle rivers. In the same way, the residue inside a broken amphora from a Mediterranean shipwreck can confirm it carried wine from a specific Greek island, mapping a clandestine trade route that bypassed all official ports. These invisible chemical traces are the lost invoices of the ancient world, confirming exchanges that history never formally recorded. From the microscopic, we shift to the macroscopic, where technology allows us to strip away the veil of time itself. In the dense jungles of Cambodia, aircraft equipped with LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, fire millions of laser pulses at the ground. These pulses penetrate the thick canopy, bouncing back to create a detailed three-dimensional map of the forest floor. What was once an impenetrable green wilderness is suddenly revealed to be a carefully managed landscape, crisscrossed by ancient roads and dotted with the foundations of lost cities, all part of the vast Khmer shadow network that supported the great temple of Angkor Wat. The same technology is revealing similarly intricate systems of footpaths and terraces under the forests of Central America, proving that what we once thought was pristine wilderness was in fact a deeply connected human world. Even the bones of animals tell a story of hidden highways. The humble chicken, a global staple today, began its journey in the forests of Southeast Asia. By studying the remains of domesticated chickens found in archaeological sites across the Indian Ocean, zooarchaeologists can track their dispersal. The birds did not fly to Africa, they were carried there, their bones appearing on the coast of Tanzania centuries before they show up in the interior, a clear marker of maritime shadow networks operated by Austronesian and Arab traders. Each of these scientific methods, from isotope analysis to LiDAR, acts like a key unlocking a different door to the past. They transform whispered theories into solid data, allowing us to assemble the pieces of a global puzzle. This is how we learn that a person from the Alps helped build Stonehenge, that Mayan nobles drank chocolate from distant lands, and that the jungles of Cambodia hide sprawling ancient suburbs. This silent evidence, written in atoms and laser light, is rewriting human history one molecule at a time, proving our ancestors were citizens of a world far wider than we ever knew. And just as science can trace the movement of people and goods, another tool can map the pathways of the words they spoke. The very words on your tongue are a living map of forgotten journeys. Take the sweet substance we call sugar. Its name began thousands of years ago in ancient India as the Sanskrit word sarkara, meaning gravel or grit. This term traveled west into Persia, becoming shakar. Arab traders then carried it across their empires as sukkar. It entered medieval Latin as saccharum, and finally landed on English shores as sugar. This single word's migration traces a perfect linguistic shadow network, a route of cultural exchange that moved not just a commodity, but the very idea of it from one civilization to the next. Language itself is a fossilized echo of these invisible roads. When we analyze the spread of words, we are effectively listening to the whispers of ancient travelers. The astonishing distribution of Austronesian languages, spoken from the island of Madagascar off the coast of Africa all the way to remote Easter Island in the Pacific, is not a coincidence. It is the direct linguistic signature of that incredible maritime shadow network, a map written not in ink, but in grammar and vocabulary across thousands of miles of open ocean. In South Asia, linguists discovered something equally revealing. The sacred Vedic Sanskrit texts contain loanwords that originate from the ancient Dravidian languages of South India. This suggests a deep, early interaction, a shadow network of ideas and people connecting the Indus Valley civilization with cultures far to the south, long before written history began to record such connections. Even place names hold onto these secrets. Across Europe, you will find towns with names beginning with Salz or variations of it: Salzburg, Salzwedel, Salins. These are not random. They are toponymic markers lingering like signposts on a map that chart the course of the vital salt roads, the shadow networks that moved this essential mineral from mine to market. And in the bustling, chaotic port cities where different shadow networks converged, new hybrid languages were born. Pidgin and Creole languages emerged as practical tools of communication between sailors, merchants, and local populations. Studying these linguistic fusions reveals the specific nodes, the world's ancient airports, where disparate cultures met, traded, and permanently influenced one another. By combining linguistics with archaeology, we can even date these waves of contact. The introduction of a new word for a new technology, like the chariot, can be traced alongside the physical evidence of the chariot's arrival, providing a stunningly precise timeline for the opening and closing of these cultural highways. The story of humanity is literally encoded in our speech, a hidden history waiting to be decoded simply by listening to the echoes of the past in our present. But if language records the routes of our ideas, another, even more intimate record is written into the very blueprint of our bodies, in the silent code of our DNA. A geneticist holds a bone fragment from a 4,000-year-old skeleton found in Siberia. Within its DNA, she finds markers that are common among indigenous populations in North America, a clear biological echo of a shadow network that once crossed the Bering Land Bridge. This is the power of ancient DNA. It allows us to see the ghostly footprints of entire populations, providing direct, personal evidence for migrations that history never wrote down. These genetic trails reveal that shadow networks were not just for objects and ideas, but for the very people who carried them. One of the most profound examples is written into the digestive systems of millions of people today. Around 5,000 years ago, a genetic mutation for lactase persistence, the ability to digest milk sugar into adulthood, began to spread from the pastoralist peoples of the Pontic-Caspian steppe. As these groups moved westward, their genes moved with them, mapping a demographic expansion across Europe along invisible cultural and economic pathways. Their success and mobility tied to their herds literally altered our biology, leaving a genetic signature of a shadow network in our very cells. We can follow similar journeys through the genetic signature of the Romani people, whose DNA tells a story of a long migration from North India into Europe, a shadow network of movement that left few official records but is indelibly inscribed in their genome. Even more astonishing is the discovery of Polynesian DNA within some indigenous South American populations. This suggests a pre-Columbian contact across the vast Pacific, a fleeting but biologically significant meeting that likely occurred along those same stellar pathways navigated by voyaging canoes. These genetic clues do not stand alone. They weave together with the archaeological finds and the linguistic patterns we have already explored, creating a powerful, multidisciplinary map of ancient connectivity. Genetics gives us the biological ledger of these invisible roads, revealing the intimate, personal stories of connection, intermarriage, and settlement that created the complex tapestry of humanity we see today. This silent biological evidence begs a fundamental question. What unseen rules of exchange and value govern the flow of all these things, from people and pottery to ideas and genes? Across such vast and hidden distances, a merchant in ancient Carthage might trade a shipment of fine Tyrian purple dye for a promise, a future favor from a trusted partner that left no written contract and no tax record for the state to find. This was the true engine of the shadow economy, a world of exchange that ran on principles far older and more resilient than coinage. While empires minted currency and taxed official trade, these invisible networks thrived on gift exchange, complex barter, and systems of credit built entirely on social bonds. The most famous example is the Kula Ring of the Trobriand Islands, a vast ceremonial circuit connecting distant archipelago communities. Here, two types of ritual objects, red shell necklaces and white shell armbands, constantly circulated in opposite directions. A man would spend years building his reputation by passing these valuable yet functionally useless items to his partners. The goal was not to accumulate wealth, but to accumulate obligation and prestige, weaving a web of social capital that guaranteed safe passage, political alliances, and access to practical trade goods for everyone involved. This was an economy of relationships, not receipts. A similar logic powered the ancient Andes through the principle of Aini, a sacred form of reciprocal labor. A family needing help to build a house or harvest a field would call upon their community, and that labor was a debt to be repaid in kind, not in currency. This system scaled up, moving goods and services across vast and rugged territories without a single central marketplace. A community in the highlands might provide freeze-dried potatoes to a valley community in exchange for their help maintaining a distant irrigation canal, all governed by this unwritten code of mutual obligation. How do we trace an economy that left no ledgers? The evidence often hides in the distribution of ceremonial items. The widespread finding of certain types of shells or distinctive, non-utilitarian pottery far from their source suggests not random trade, but the deliberate movement of gifts to cement alliances. These economic systems were incredibly robust. When a king was overthrown or a drought struck, the state-controlled markets might collapse, but these personal networks of reciprocity endured. They allowed for the redistribution of food during a famine, as those who had given would now receive, and they maintained diplomatic channels between groups that were officially at war. The economic logic here was not about maximizing profit, but about minimizing risk and reinforcing the social fabric. It was this invisible web of give and take, of promises remembered and favors owed, that formed the true, enduring glue of countless ancient societies. This profound connection between exchange and the human spirit leads us to the final, and perhaps most mysterious, dimension of these hidden pathways. A pilgrim's journey to a holy mountain was never just a spiritual act. It was a transaction, a communication, and a form of exploration, all woven into one. Across the ancient world, sacred paths formed some of the most resilient shadow networks, their primary purpose divine, yet their function profoundly worldly. A Hindu devotee walking the Char Dham circuit through the high Himalayas was treading a path worn smooth by generations of merchants carrying salt and wool. In Japan, the arduous Shikoku pilgrimage connecting 88 temples doubled as a vital corridor for ascetics, merchants, and information moving between isolated villages. These routes were sanctified, which made them safer than ordinary roads. A monastery or a wayside shrine offered not only spiritual solace but also practical shelter, food, and a measure of protection from bandits, attracting a constant, diverse flow of humanity. This sacred safety net enabled the most profound cultural exchanges. The spread of Buddhism from India across Southeast Asia did not happen along military routes, but largely along a southern Silk Road of pilgrimage and monastic expansion. Monks traveling to sacred sites carried with them not only sutras but also new artistic styles, medical knowledge, and architectural techniques. The archaeological evidence for these journeys is often found in the humblest of offerings. A shard of Chinese porcelain left at a roadside shrine in Tibet, or a Mediterranean glass bead deposited at a temple in India. These votive objects are the silent testimonials of individuals who crossed continents along these hallowed trails. These networks did more than move people and goods. They created a shared cultural geography, imbuing the landscape itself with a spiritual significance that transcended political borders. A river, a mountain, or a cave became a node in a vast, invisible web of faith, connecting distant cultures through a common reverence for the sacred. The endurance of routes like the Camino de Santiago into the modern era is a powerful testament to the lasting power of these networks, proving that the most enduring paths are often those walked with purpose in the heart. This deep interconnection between spiritual belief and physical movement reveals a critical truth about ancient power. The empires that understood how to harness these invisible threads were the ones that truly shaped the world. The mighty Persian royal road was a marvel of imperial engineering, a stone and dirt testament to the power of the King of Kings. Yet the true secret to governing an empire of 100 different cultures, stretching from the Nile to the Indus, lay in the web of older, quieter paths that ran parallel to it. The Achaemenid Persians were masters of co-opting the shadow networks that already crisscrossed their new domains. They used these invisible channels to move spies and collect intelligence, ensuring that a rebellion in distant Egypt could be reported to the heartland with stunning speed. More importantly, they used them to foster a subtle integration, allowing for the flow of artistic motifs, religious ideas, and administrative practices that bound the empire together not by force alone, but by a shared, interconnected culture. This was the intangible foundation of imperial power. The Romans understood this principle perfectly. While the cursus publicus carried official decrees along its paved highways, the lifeblood of the empire, the grain to feed the legions and the silver to pay them, often traveled on local merchant ships and narrow provincial footpaths. The Roman state's genius was in its ability to plug into these pre-existing systems, to tax them and utilize them for supply without always needing to build and control the infrastructure itself. This reliance on shadow networks was a double-edged sword. During the chaotic 3rd century crisis, when barbarian incursions and civil war severed these vital channels, the entire Roman economic and communication system began to fail. Provinces were cut off, armies could not be supplied, and the empire nearly shattered into pieces. The fragility of an empire could be measured by the vulnerability of its unseen supply lines. In stark contrast, the Mongol Empire's unprecedented success stemmed from the fact that it was born from a shadow network. The steppe highway of horse and rumor was its native environment. When Genghis Khan unified the tribes, he did not create a new system. He simply scaled up a proven, fluid model of communication and logistics to a continental level, the Yam courier system being its most famous formalization. But empires did not just use old networks, they also created new ones to serve their own clandestine needs. In the Spanish Americas, conquistadors and colonists routinely used informal channels and black markets to trade in goods like silver and cocoa, deliberately bypassing the restrictive royal monopolies that sought to control all wealth for the crown. This reveals a profound historical pattern. The rise of a great civilization was often a story of its strategic position at the confluence of multiple shadow networks, a place where the invisible roads of trade, information, and migration intersected. Its fall, however, was frequently a story of those same channels being cut by war, climate change, or internal collapse. The true architecture of empire was not always made of stone, but of the relentless, unseen flow of knowledge and obligation. And within that constant flow, moving quietly through history, were figures whose roles have been largely overlooked. Her hands moved with a rhythm known to women for generations, spinning thread in a small Anatolian village that would one day become part of a royal garment in a Mesopotamian palace. While the names of kings and merchants were etched into clay tablets, her contribution remained anonymous, yet it was her skill and labor that formed the very fabric of the economy. Across the ancient world, women were the unseen architects of these shadow networks, their roles as producers, managers, and diplomats woven into the daily life that powered civilizations. They were the master potters creating the standardized vessels that archaeologists now find across vast distances, and the textile weavers whose intricate patterns and dyes became coveted trade items. They perfected the fermentation processes for foods and drinks, transforming perishable goods into stable, transportable commodities that could sustain long journeys. Within the household, women often managed the microeconomies of barter and local exchange, decisions that collectively shaped regional trade flows. Perhaps their most profound role was as agents of cultural connection through marriage alliances. When a woman traveled to a new community as a bride, she was not an isolated individual, she was a living bridge. She brought with her the culinary traditions of her homeland, the songs and stories of her people, and the practical knowledge of how to weave a particular style of cloth or cultivate a specific crop. In West Africa, the production and trade of shea butter, a vital resource for cooking, medicine, and cosmetics, was a domain controlled by women. Their networks moved this valuable commodity from the savanna regions into the forest zones, creating economic interdependence along invisible routes. Similarly, the knowledge of creating deep, fast indigo dyes was a specialized skill passed from mother to daughter, and the vibrant blue textiles they produced traveled along trade routes that connected entire ecosystems. In the Andes, the cultivation of quinoa and the preservation of potatoes through freeze-drying were technologies sustained by women's knowledge. The complex geometric patterns woven into their textiles were more than just decoration. They were a language of identity and belief, and the movement of these textiles along kinship networks spread artistic and cultural ideas across the mountains. The archaeological evidence for this vital participation is subtle but undeniable. A spindle whorl, a simple clay disc used to weight a spinning thread, found hundreds of miles from its origin, tells a story not of conquest, but of the quiet exchange of technology and style. The chemical analysis of residues inside cooking pots can reveal the movement of recipes and culinary practices, tracing the invisible pathways of cultural transmission that women navigated. Studies of skeletal remains through isotopic analysis consistently show that women in many ancient societies were more likely to have traveled long distances from their childhood homes than men, a silent testament to their role in forging and maintaining the social and economic ties that bound disparate communities together. To overlook the work of women is to see only half of the ancient map. These shadow networks were not solely the domain of male merchants carrying luxuries or warriors securing routes. They were equally dependent on the daily, foundational labor of women whose production and knowledge created the resilient, everyday web of human connection. This legacy of invisible connection did not fade with the ancient world. It simply evolved, weaving itself into the very infrastructure of our modern lives. The same fiber optic cables snaking across the ocean floor today often trace the ghostly outlines of ancient maritime shadow networks. Our modern world is built upon the bones of these invisible roads, their logic embedded deep within our infrastructure. The interstate highway you drive might follow the exact path of a bison trail, later used by indigenous hunters, then by pioneer wagons. Its route perfected by countless feet over thousands of years to find the easiest grade through a mountain pass. Railways curve through valleys first mapped by nomadic herders moving their flocks to seasonal pastures. This is not a coincidence, it is a testament to the enduring wisdom encoded in the landscape itself. Our global digital network, the Internet, is the ultimate modern shadow network. It operates on a principle the ancient world would recognize instantly: the decentralized, rapid flow of information, bypassing central control to connect individuals directly. It is the digital successor to the knowledge highways that carried Buddhist sutras and Greek philosophy across continents. Even our morning routines are tied to these old pathways. The coffee in your cup likely traveled a supply chain that mirrors colonial trade routes, which themselves were laid over pre-existing indigenous networks for moving cacao and vanilla. The cultural artifacts of our daily lives tell the same story. A slice of pizza, its origins in Naples, is now a global staple. The practice of yoga, with its deep roots in Indian spiritual traditions, is now a worldwide phenomenon. This cultural diffusion is the living legacy of those ancient channels of connection. Recognizing these deep historical roots does more than satisfy our curiosity. It offers us a crucial blueprint for the future. The most resilient ancient networks were not the most rigid, but the most adaptive, the ones that could shift with a changing climate or a fallen empire. They were decentralized, redundant, and built on local knowledge. In an era facing climate disruption and resource scarcity, these are powerful lessons in sustainability. We are only beginning to grasp how profoundly these hidden pathways have sculpted our modern existence, a realization that inevitably leads us to a more profound and necessary question: who gets to tell the story of these forgotten roads, and what responsibilities do we bear in uncovering them? A map drawn from the sky can erase a living memory. For an indigenous community in the Amazon, the ancestral trails their elders have walked for generations are not lost, they are remembered. When outside researchers arrive with satellite imagery and drones to discover these same pathways, they are not just collecting data, they are navigating a profound ethical landscape. The study of these invisible roads is far from a neutral science. It is deeply entangled with questions of cultural heritage, land rights, and the urgent project of decolonizing history. The knowledge held in oral traditions is a parallel archive, one that has preserved the routes of migrations, the locations of sacred springs, and the history of trade for countless centuries. To ignore this living library or to extract its contents without consent and reciprocity is a form of academic colonialism often called parachute science. Researchers from wealthy nations fly in, gather their data, and fly out, publishing their findings in journals the local communities will never see without sharing credit or benefit. This extractive process repeats the very patterns of ancient empires, using invisible roads to take without giving back. The stakes are incredibly high because the past is never truly past. An archaeological discovery of an ancient maritime network can be used to support a modern claim over fishing rights or island territories. Evidence of historic trade routes can be weaponized in disputes over national borders. When we trace these shadow networks, we are not just drawing lines on a map, we are drawing lines of power. This makes ethical collaboration not just a moral ideal, but a necessity for accuracy. The most complete understanding emerges only when satellite data is woven together with the songs that describe a mountain pass, when chemical analysis of pottery is paired with the stories of the potter's descendants. This inclusive, multivocal approach is especially vital because shadow networks so often tell the stories of those history has marginalized: the nomadic traders, the skilled artisans, the women managing local economies whose contributions were vital yet systematically overlooked. By centering their narratives, we do more than correct the historical record. We build a more just and representative understanding of our shared human journey. The invisible roads belong to humanity, but their stories belong first to the communities who kept them alive. Tracing them, therefore, must be a collective endeavor, a partnership between technology and tradition, between the global academy and local knowledge. This ethical foundation is what will guide the next great discoveries in this field, as new tools and new collaborations promise to reveal a world even more profoundly connected than we ever suspected. An artificial intelligence silently sifts through 10,000 archaeological site reports, mapping the distribution of a specific pottery type against a database of ancient climate shifts. It finds a correlation no human ever noticed, a pulse of cultural exchange that flared every time a particular desert corridor received above average rainfall. This is the new frontier in our search for the ancient world's invisible roads. The future of tracing shadow networks lies not in a single tool, but in a symphony of interdisciplinary collaboration, where artificial intelligence, citizen science, and immersive technology converge to reveal a past more connected than we ever dreamed. Machine learning algorithms can now digest colossal, disparate data sets, from the microscopic pollen grains in a soil core that tell us what crops were grown, to the precise locations of thousands of Roman coins, revealing the ebb and flow of economic influence along ghostly trade routes. These systems do not replace the archaeologist, they give them a new kind of map, one that models the probability of ancient movement based on 100 different variables at once. This global effort is being amplified by the eyes of millions. Citizen science projects invite people everywhere to scan satellite imagery from their own computers, searching for the subtle, straight lines of a buried Roman road or the circular imprint of a forgotten nomad camp, turning the entire public into partners in this great detective story. And once these pathways are identified, we may soon not just map them, but walk them. Virtual reality promises to reconstruct these lost worlds, allowing you to stand on the deck of a Phoenician ship at dusk, watching the North Star rise, or to trek with a caravan through the echoing silence of the Taklamakan Desert, feeling the scale and challenge of these epic journeys in a profoundly personal way. The purpose of this research, however, is not just to understand the past, but to learn from it. There is a growing movement to revive the ancient knowledge embedded in these networks for modern sustainability. Communities are looking to restore traditional water management systems, like the intricate Kanat tunnels of Persia, which followed invisible gradients and ancient pathways to bring water to arid lands, offering timeless solutions for a warming world. This future hinges on a crucial integration, the weaving of indigenous knowledge systems with Western scientific methods. The living memory of a landscape, held in the oral histories of its people, is an irreplaceable data set, confirming and illuminating what satellites and algorithms can only suggest. As our planet changes, it is revealing its own secrets. Melting glaciers in the Alps are surrendering the bodies and belongings of prehistoric travelers, frozen on their high mountain passes for thousands of years. Drying lake beds from the American West to Central Asia are exposing the foundations of settlements that once thrived on their shores, settlements that were nodes in networks we never knew existed. Each discovery confirms that history is not a series of isolated events, but a single, breathing tapestry of continuous interaction. Our journey into the invisible is just beginning, and its discoveries will continue to rewrite our story. As we reflect on the profound implications of these hidden highways, we must ask ourselves a final, lingering question. We have journeyed across continents and millennia, tracing the shadow networks that silently shaped the course of human civilization. From the star paths of the Polynesians to the desert trails of the Sahara, these invisible roads facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and genes, creating the interconnected world we inhabit today. They remind us that history is not just about kings and battles, but about the countless unnamed travelers who moved along these pathways, weaving the fabric of our shared heritage. The resilience of these networks, adapting to climate change, political collapse, and technological shifts, offers lessons for our own era of global challenges. As we uncover these hidden histories, we gain a deeper appreciation for the ingenuity and interconnectedness of our ancestors. Let this exploration inspire you to look beyond the obvious, to see the unseen connections that bind us all. If this journey into the shadows has captivated you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. The past is full of invisible roads waiting to be discovered.